Hey, curious humans. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, depending on where you're at. My name is Paul Chin Jr., and today I wanted to take a look at Copia. I just came across this new open source tool and wanted to play around with it and see what I could do. Copia is an open source cross platform backup tool that I found. So it's going to run on Mac OS, which is what I'm running now. It'll also run on Windows and, of course, on Linux. One of the neat things that I thought would be really fun to try out is backing up Notion. So I've had this really difficult problem of creating and maintaining a blog until I realized that Notion could be my blogging platform. But as I'm writing stuff, it's getting saved into the cloud and onto Notion's backend servers, and that's good. But as I start accumulating more and more of my own personal knowledge and data on it, it'd be nice to be able to have my own control of the backups and the copies. So there's not a direct way where we can issue some commands against a Notion API to do a backup. Fortunately, everything is done over HTTP. So I'm going to show you how we can use Notion's export tool from inside the browser, get the information we need, hook that up to Copia, and then let Copia make the copies encrypted and compressed straight up into an S3 bucket on AWS. Are you ready? Let's go. First thing I'm going to do is drag down my picture away. Yeah, bye. Okay. So, Notion backup with Copia. The first thing that we're going to look at is here I've got Notion open in my browser. What's cool is we can pull open the network tab and immediately we can start messing around with their export tool right here. If we click on export and we say we want everything, when we hit this button, it will give us an NQ task here. And then inside of these headers and payload, we're going to extract some information. Instead of showing everybody my public token, I'm going to go ahead and show you a picture of a screenshot I took earlier. Once you're able to open up your network tab, you're going to look for this NQ task, and then you're going to look for headers. And inside this cookie block, there will be a whole lot of information. What we want is the string after this token underscore v2. You're going to copy that and save it someplace. And we're going to load it as an environment variable for our upcoming Node script. And the next thing we're also going to need is under the payload of the NQ task, we're going to need this space ID that's right there. Now, what's important to mention here is that this is a workaround for Notion that doesn't have a direct API export. Notion does have an API, however, again, no bulk exporting of your data. Fortunately enough, I found another person who had this exact same problem, which is great. Whenever I come across a new problem, I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one to have done it before. So let's start and jump straight into the code. So here I've got my main script here. This is Notion backup.js, and I will have a link to the GitHub repo when I publish all of this, so you'll be able to take a look through my code, and it'll have references to all the docs that I pull all this from. But real quickly, all that happens is you're giving it the Notion token that we've gotten earlier and the Notion space ID. I have an env example here. What you're going to do is copy and paste those big long strings into here so that your Node script has access to it. It's just going to make a direct call to this Notion endpoint, the same endpoint that we make a post request to when we are asking it for an export. And what it's going to return is a task ID. And with that task ID, we can continue polling on a stream until we get all of the data. What you're going to need to do on your local computer is create this this Node.js script and create a folder called HTML and a folder called Markdown right in here. Those folders will allow the script to pull down this HTML zip and Markdown zip and then expand it into these folders. And it is these folders that we are going to tell Copia to go ahead and back up to the cloud on S3. So let's take a look at just running this script to see what happens. I'm going to go ahead and clear out what we did before. So I'm going to delete all these. And I'm going to delete all these. Now it's important to have the directories there to begin with. We could probably modify the script to auto-create the directories as we're going. But when we're doing this as a regular backup, it'll just overwrite what's existing there. And what's cool is Copia won't make an entire copy of everything again. It creates what's called a repository on the other side and is able to get diffs on the changes between your local files and what is in the repository. So it's only going to send up the difference. So only when files change will it make the actual snapshot backup. All right, so we can come into here in your terminal and then run Notion backup. And it will start this task, and it gets this task ID back, and then we will see it start to pull down pages and actually create these zip files. Once it downloads these zip files, they'll start expanding them into this HTML and Markdown folder. What I find really fascinating about this Markdown and HTML folder is that we can use this HTML folder and just serve it like any other web pages. Once you have your pages exported, you can run a local web server, point it to this folder, and you'll be able to navigate through your content, which I think is a really cool way to save it. And then having Markdown as another option for parsing through your data is really handy too. So while that is going, I'm going to go ahead and tell you about the next thing that we have to do. Because now that we have a script that will pull down the data that we need, we want to be able to automate this. We want to tell the script to run on a specific interval. On macOS, that's where LaunchD comes in. And LaunchD is a utility on macOS to write some XML in this file called a plist. In this plist, what we're doing is describing what we would like to run and how often we want to run it. Right now, I have it set as an example to do it every 60 seconds. If you wanted to do it weekly or monthly, you can change this with an interval calendar argument, and I can show you what that looks like by here. So right here, instead of saying every minute or 5 minutes, you can tell it every Monday, every weekday on number 1, Monday at 11:30. That's when it will trigger this script. Now, LaunchD and this plist file need to be in this location here. Home, library, launch agents, and I named it schedule demo. You could name it whatever you'd like. This is schedule demo. Now, in order to load this and actually start the scheduling jobs, you're going to use the command launch ctl load and then point it to your plist file. Once it loads, it'll begin auto triggering based on your schedule. So that's pretty cool. So let's go back to our backup here. It says it's exported 269 pages, and we've got both the markdown.zip, HTML zip, and now in our HTML folder, that's got everything in there. I want to take a second here, and actually I think if we load this here and I run live server at this location, it'll pop up all of my HTML pages. Look at that. Isn't this cool? And so I can come in here and look. I think that's really neat that it is now live offline. It's my data now. So once we have this, now comes the star of the show. We're going to go ahead and check out Copia. So Copia on macOS is easy enough to just homebrew install, brew install Copia. I'm assuming that you all have used Homebrew before. Once it's installed onto your system, the next thing we want to do, let's go ahead and just verify that Copia is still running here. Let me turn this off. We can just come into our terminal and do Copia -- version. And there we go. We've got Copia up and running. One of the important things to know about Copia is this concept of repositories. If you're familiar with Git repositories, it's this remote destination that has your data and you're able to diff it. You're able to create a meaningful difference between two separate sources. And Copia is doing the same thing. Before we can tell Copia where to upload, we have to create the remote resource. For me, I'm going to go ahead and use A Cloud Guru's nifty AWS sandbox. What this will do is load up a temporary environment that we can play in, and I can show all the credentials on the screen, and no one's going to hack my personal AWS account. So we're going to go ahead and start this sandbox, and what it does is it gives me right here my access ID and my secret ID. We're going to need both of these when we issue the Copia commands. But what we're going to do now is go ahead and open an incognito window, and it's going to want me to sign in. And what's neat about the A Cloud Guru playground is that I can just come in here, hit copy user, drop in cloud user, and grab this temporary password and drop that right in there. We're going to sign in. This is a nice fresh instance and cloud account for AWS. There's nothing in it. So I can come over here and you can either click S3 here or search for S3. The AWS console is quite a beast. It's hard to just dive straight into, but it's worth getting comfortable with sometimes, especially for doing things like just creating an S3 bucket. So S3, if you're not familiar, is an object store service from AWS. It's a way to store files and get access to them on the internet. So we're going to type in a new bucket name. Every bucket that you create in AWS has a global namespace, so you have to pick something uniquely just for this. So let's think of something cool to add. We're going to call it the Notion Backup Solution 9999. Probably not taken. For region, we'll just leave it default US 1. We're going to leave that enabled, or rather disabled. We're going to leave all this going. We're going to go ahead and enable bucket versioning so we can see the different versions of the files as they come in. So we're going to go ahead and create bucket. Now, once we get our bucket name created, we're going to want to make note of this name here. If you're doing this in production, more than likely you're going to have some infrastructure as code that will manage and generate these bucket names, access key IDs, and secret access keys. That's for a different video, totally different topic on how to secure your AWS resources under different IAM users. But for right now, this will work to explain the concepts that we're going to go through here today. Let's go ahead and go back to the command line. From here, we have our S3 bucket made, and we have our script ready. It's on a schedule. We have our assets. We have Copia installed. The next thing to do is to create a new repository with Copia. That command is, conveniently enough, I saved it right here, because typing is hard sometimes. So this is the command we need right here. Copia repository create S3. It's really nice that Copia has just a whole bunch of different places that you can create your repositories in. So you can do them with a local file system, say you have a NAS set up, or you have your own home lab, home server. You can also use Azure, Backblaze, any S3 compliant thing, G Drive. Basically, they're all here. I am shocked they have so many different connectors already ready to go, especially something as convenient as S3. Under the hood, what they're using is Go. So there's a AWS Go SDK that they are using to create the S3 put commands. This is important to know because you want to be mindful of just exactly how much data you're going to be sending up and down into S3. If you're moving lots of data up and down, you're going to be paying for that bandwidth. Based on your use case and your needs, you're going to have to find a good happy balance of how many things you have to send up versus how many things you have to pull down. And one of the nice things about Copia is it's going to minimize the amount of data that it has to transfer because it's only going to send the difference. Another cool thing is that it's going to compress the files before they send it up, and we'll see the chunks here in a second. So we're going to use this repository create S3 command that I have conveniently dropped in here. The next thing we need to do is go back to my A-Cloud Guru sandbox. We're going to grab this access key ID. We're going to drop it in here. And then we're also going to grab the secret access key and drop it in here. And we need the awesome bucket name. It was so awesome that I've forgotten what it was. Right, Notion Backup Solution 9999. That's right. There we go. We're going to plop it right in here. Now that we have this command, we're going to copy this and drop it right in here. With any luck, this should work. Here we've got a prompt that says enter a new password to create new repository. This is a good moment to point out that Copia is zero knowledge encryption. That means as soon as you enter your passphrase here, it's tied to the repository. If you lose this passphrase, there is no way to restore that repository without it. So just be sure that you're aware of that. This is a really cool secure tool, and they're not messing around with it. So we're going to type in a super safe password, and we're going to enter it again. And this will start creating the repository. Now, if we looked here under our S3 buckets, if we click in here and we start looking, there is our initial sort of repository bootstrapped files. One of the nice things here is we can go ahead and continue to validate our connection. Now that we are connected to the repository, There's an S3 bucket in place. It's time to set our policy, which will tell Copia exactly when and how to back up these local files. In order to do that, we're going to look at Copia policy show global. Copia policy show global. So we can look at this output here. This is pretty much default. You can set policies for each repository and directory that you want. You can even add ignore rules. So if there are files that you don't want put up, you can ignore them here, much like a git ignore file. Under scheduling here, we notice that we have scheduled snapshots none. We're going to fix that right now by saying to Copia policy list, and that will give us this this ID here as our target. We're going to copy this and put it where target should be. So now the command is Copia policy set on this target a snapshot interval. This argument here is it says 5 minutes. You can make it 5 minutes, 5 hours, 1 hour, 1 week. Inside of Copia, it's using a Go module called time to parse this input. Took me a second to figure out what I was supposed to put in here, to be honest. I put in a bunch of different cron evaluations and cron syntax, and it wasn't happening. So I had to dig into the repo to figure out what all was going on. And sidebar, this is a great time to mention the Copia community. Let me bring up my face again. Ha! Great. So this is a really good time to bring up the Copia community. They have a Slack channel, and I immediately went into it to check out what the vibe is like. Whenever I'm using a new tool, I like to see what other people in the community are doing. When I happened to be in there, they actually were looking for recommendations for front-end testing frameworks. And I mentioned that Microsoft Playwright is a browser automation tool that also has experimental Electron support. So I mentioned it and I said, hey, you should totally check out Playwright. It's got Electron support as an experimental flag. And the very next day, the maintainers picked it up and put it in a pull request, and they're trying it out right now, which you don't see that often when you come into a new community with community leaders soliciting feedback, getting really open about the tools that they use, and then so quickly implementing it. So I feel really good about the Copia community and what I've seen and the kind of help that they give people. Even this issue I had here with the parsing of this argument right here, 5M. Because I tried 5, I tried 50. Eventually, I realized you needed the M because of the underlying parsing of the time module. So let's go ahead and do this. Policy set snapshot interval, 5 minutes. We've gotten the S3 bucket set up, we've gotten Copia installed, we've created a repository. The next thing we have to do is connect to the repository. So that's where this command here comes in, Copia repository connect S3. And we're going to give it the same bucket name, access key, and secret access key. We're going to drop it in, and it's going to ask for a password to open the repository, because even to connect to it and start manipulating the data, we have to enter our super secret password that we'll never forget. Otherwise, we won't have access to it ever again. So we're going to enter the password. We're now connected to the repository. Now it's time to take our very first snapshot. We're going to create here and point it to where our directory is, wherever that may be for you. For me, it's right here under projects and Notion backup. And there it goes. It's starting to encrypt everything and send it on up to the cloud. it's done taking its first snapshot. Super excited. Let's go check out what's in the S3 bucket. So if we look in our S3 bucket, initially set up, it had 13 objects. Now it's got 31. Pretty good. All of these objects are encrypted and compressed. To check that compression, what we're going to do is, let's calculate total size and see what happens. 323 megabytes. Very cool. So what would that be on our local file system, I wonder? We can find out by going right here and looking at our folder. On disk, it's 512.9 megabytes. So it's compressed it by a pretty decent amount, only 300 megabytes in my bucket. I'd say that's pretty cool. So now that we've got all this set up, it's all on an automatic schedule. It'll just keep taking snapshots in the background. Let's go ahead and pull it back down and make sure that we can actually get all of our data back. To do that, we're going to use the Copia restore. What we're going to do is take a look at the snapshot that we created and then restore it back onto our local file system. So let's take a look now. Okay, so from here, what we can do is after we've connected to our repository, we can run the command Copia snapshot list, and this will give us an ID for our snapshot. We'll use that right here for the next command, Copia snapshot restore. Now it takes a second argument of the name of the folder that you want to bring it down into. So just named it D1 for directory 1. We could name this door, and it'll make a directory called restore. Let's run Copia snapshot restore, and what we'll see is the output of it actually bringing down all of those files again. And wow, that was really quick. So now we can look inside that directory, and we see all of our files backed down from S3, unencrypted, decompressed, ready for us to use it. So we can cd into HTML. Yep, we can run live server. Yep. And we can take a look at our backups. Again, this is running off of the local drive. We're coming in here. We can open this HTML page, and here's my content, all my pictures, everything's there, looking good. We can, again, go ahead and validate how big this file is. Let's go in here, restore. How big is this? 512.9, which is exactly how big the other one is. 512.9. I think we got it all. So let's recap what we've done today. You've got a Notion page and you really want to back it up. You go ahead and use Notion's post endpoint that creates an export zip. We save that zip and write a script to automate pulling down those assets on a regular schedule. Then we use Copia on another regular schedule to go ahead and upload those files to S3. One of the things that I really wanted to touch on was a little bit of extensibility that Copia has. Here under Actions, we can essentially have hooks that will run scripts before and after a snapshot happens. You could imagine before a snapshot happens to go ahead and maybe force a local refresh of your data. Or after it happens, it can dispatch a notification to any service that you want, and you can create logs for that. I think Copia is a pretty neat tool, and looking forward to playing with it more in the future. Let me know what you think.